I think it's a great thing that I can talk about the history of Frankston. My name's Brian Mace. I'm into my 82nd year. I've lived in Frankston all my life other than the first 6 years. I've been around the town for a long time and met a lot of people. I don't think there would have be anyone else that I could think of in Frankston that would have covered such a diverse range of living as what I have around the heart of our, what was a town and now a city.
Well, my name's Leon Costemans. I came to Frankston back in 1972. I came to Frankston intending to stay 5 years. That is 45 years ago. So there must have been something about Frankston that I liked. The features that Frankston has are quite unique. We've got coastline with the beaches, of course, which are very popular. We've got 2 creek areas with natural bush, Sweetwater Creek and Camnock Creek, one at each end. We've got the wetlands out to the north, and we've got areas of bush that are, well, what's left of them now, that are scattered to various areas around out to the east of Frankston. The time that I came in 1972, it was at that time that the Langwarrin Flora and Fauna Reserve was still under the Commonwealth Government as a military reserve, but there was agitation on behalf of a lot of local people to try to get that reserved as a natural reserve, because it's the best bit of bush really on this side, in the southeastern side. All the soldiers in Victoria that went to the Boer War were trained at Langwarrin, and so that was significant as far as this area is concerned. The railway line that comes out, the Stony Point railway line, was brought out initially to bring them from the Frankston station. They used to trundle out to bring everything, horses, men, fodder, tentage and so on, all out from the station by train. And so they established the reserve there as a military reserve in 1886 to be a sort of a permanent base. And if we then shoot up to the period, the First World War period, 1914-18, it was the site for a hospital, a venereal disease hospital, and the soldiers that were sent back from overseas to be treated, the majority of them finished up at the Langwarrin Hospital, and over 7,000 soldiers went through that hospital between 1915 and the end of the First World War. When I came in 1972, Frankston really was still very much just around everything this side of the station. And if you walked out further towards Langwarrin or out in those radial directions, you came to a lot of farmland and remnant areas of natural bush. Most of that area, when we look at it now, has just been filled up with housing, and as I say, we've had to maintain the areas of natural bush, and we are still trying to maintain any corridors that there were, and there are very few of them left, but they're now trying to re-establish natural corridors that link up the reserves. Unfortunately, it's too late in many cases because they're cut by roads, and of course to have natural corridors when you've got a freeway going cutting it is really means that the corridor doesn't mean much. But there's been massive developments, particularly when you come out to Langwarrin, which was just a little village, even back when I came here, and going out particularly to the northeast. There, out beyond Carrum and that area, of course, now has just become so developed that most of the original natural areas are just a memory to most of us.
Frankston Corner, the pub corner, has been an interesting place, and I think it's mainly remembered for the riots that took place there in 1979. I should go back many years to work out why that became a central area and one of note, not just by the people of Frankston, that particular pub corner, as it's been well known as. That if we go back to the very, very early days just after the war, it was the drinking hole for the sailors from the Cerberus, the naval depot down at Crib Point. They would knock off on a Friday night, catch the old steam train into Frankston. It would get into Frankston around about 5:45. There'd be anything up to 100, 150 sailors jump off the train and tear along Wall Street to get to the pub before 6 o'clock, because back in those days we had 6 o'clock closing. You had to buy your beer at 6 and then you had 30 minutes to drink it. So the sailors would all tear into the pubs order their 12 beers, line them up on the bar, then they had 30 minutes to drink their 6 to 12 beers or whatever it was. So back then the naval police would be circulating around the streets of Frankston of a weekend because it was a watering hole for a lot of the Navy personnel. Their personnel also played quite a part in a lot of the parades and everything that Frankston had on during those days, with our Australia Day, Anzac Days and so forth. So the pub's got a name for itself as a real drinking hole. Another thing that was in at those stages, it's probably been forgotten with a lot of people, was on a Sunday, the drinking laws were such that you had to be a bona fide traveller and travel a distance of 25 miles from memory from the GPO in Melbourne before you could get a drink and go and have a meal in a pub. So we were right on the boundary of that. So a lot of the suburbs and the people from the suburbs of Melbourne would drive to Frankston, produce their licence to show that they'd travelled their 25 miles so that they could be bona fide drinkers at our hotels. Crazy laws, crazy days, but things that put Frankston on the map and made the Frankston pub corner the thing that has got this historical value even with today's population. But a lot of the young ones wouldn't realise how stupid the drinking laws were in those days. On the night of our riots, and I'll jump ahead again, I'd been off duty, living in my home only 200 or 300 metres away, and I had a phone call from the police station to say that I'd better go in because there'd been trouble at the three pubs. And we should remember that the youth of Frankston has all grown up, and it wasn't just the Frankston's youth, and it wasn't just the Pine Plantation youth, and it wasn't just the Coringal youth. It was the combined youth of Frankston and the youth from all over the Mornington Peninsula, and we'll take it out as far as Cranbourne. So to blame any particular group of young people has got little to do with it. You could liken the pub corner to a football match. It was like a big sporting event. A Friday and Saturday night you went to the pubs to have a good booze up, to flirt with your girlfriends inside the pubs and come out on the footpath and have a fight. There were half a dozen shops there where you could buy your hamburgers and refreshments when you emptied out onto the footpath. Midnight, you'd have anything up to 1,500 people all coming out of the pubs, all within a 10 or 15 minute interval. Most would go home. I'm generalising a bit to say they were all scallywags because my own two sons went there quite a bit, and I was often had cause to go up and pull them out by the scruff of the neck and make sure they walked their 200 metres at home. And the night of the riots, I mustn't even admit that I was a little bit wary as to whether I was going to start conking heads, and they might have been my two sons. But that didn't turn out to be the case, thank goodness. So for some reason, on this particular night, there were only about a dozen or so uniformed policemen down out and around the pubs. The two or three were locked up and put into a brawler van. Two or three more were walked up to the pub, to the police station. It was only probably 150 metres away. And a bit of a skirmish broke out when one particular group were arrested by their mates, and a small brawl broke out. The small brawl got to be a bit bigger and a bit bigger and a bit bigger until the police were well and truly outnumbered. A call had to be put through to Melbourne in the early stages to see whether they could send their brawler vans down, which were large vans that held up to a dozen that you could throw in the back of all at one hit, rather than the small divisional vans that the local police had. So the crowd grew to probably about 400 that followed the police up to the station, started chancing. The 400 grew to about 700 or 800. Fisticuffs started, and then all hell broke loose. They started to turn cars over, smash car windows, not just police cars, got into the compound at the back of the police station, damaged cars, broke some police station windows, a couple of them hopped up onto the roof of the police station. The cells were sort of at the back of the police station down the driveway. They were looking over the brick wall straight into the cells, yelling and screaming at their mates that had been locked up. I hadn't been on duty at the time, so I was playing sort of a second row fiddle to Inspector Mengler that came down to town who dug up a local justice of the peace, and between them they all worked out what it was to read out a riot act, which had never been read out. I didn't even know what the riot act was, but the act was read out by a JP that stood on the bonnet of the car. Not one person could understand what he was saying, even though I was only 5 or 6 paces from him, but it was read out to cover our tracks in case anything went wrong with the arrest that then had to take place. Well, the crowd, the initial crowd was probably 500 at guesswork, but there would be another quite a few hundred around that might have even got up to 12 or 1500 scattered about, just having a sticky beak. But 500 or 600 were the ones that were causing a lot of trouble. There were quite a few arrests made. There were some few jail sentences that were handed out. It finished up quite a wild night. I wouldn't say that there was any undue punishment handed out that shouldn't have been handed out. Some of the girls that got involved in the front line trying to protect their boyfriends became a problem, and it's something that women in particular should keep out of, because you never know who's swinging fists and boots around, and even some fools might even be snapping off bottles and wielding bottles. I didn't see any bottles being wielded, but it's something that I didn't like to see the young girls getting involved in. There were a few knocked down, not so much by police, but just as the young ones rushed around. There was then Mr. Mengler, the officer that was running the show, organised a baton charge, and there were a couple of hundred retreated pretty quickly before 30 or 40 police that had now arrived from local stations. They were retreated down the street. The skirmishing probably went on for a couple of hours after the initial conflict, long enough that police horses were sent down from Melbourne by their vehicles, and they paraded the streets of Frankston. And from there on, for a couple of years, it was quite a regular occurrence to have 3 or 4 police horses trotting around the streets of Frankston, and it became quite a tourist attraction actually. They'd get down early in the evening, and particularly through the summer months, a lot of the local residents would bring the kids in to talk and pat the police horses. So there were a lot of good things happened out of the riot, if I could put it that way. People in Frankston, a lot of those involved at council, the police, a lot of the workers around Frankston that looked after the youth realised that we had to do things for the youth. They had to have things that could occupy them. The youth centre that I was talking about, Police and Citizens Youth Centre, became bigger than ever. People got clubs more involved, and I'm not just talking about sporting clubs, but there was a real cooling off period where people started to take note that youth did need something to do, and that certainly did happen.
My name's Glenn Cooper. I've lived here since 1985 in Frankston. Great place to live, I'll tell you that now. I believe that my street smarts and my experiences actually works very, very well inside of Frankston and its community, and for the years that I've been here. I am an ex-street kid myself. My first institutionalisation was at the age of 9 and 11 and 15. I was locked up until I was 18. And I went through, I've been stabbed 8 times and shot twice. I come down here to Melbourne after my last stabbing in the 80s. Got into a big blue with the coppers, laid out 5 coppers, was going to end up in jail again. Hence why I started to go to church. And I spent 17 years in the church, 3 years Bible college. I've got diplomas in biblical theology, but like I said, I dealt predominantly with the down and outers, the disadvantaged, right, within inside of our community. Right, we are the major hospital in this district, right, for all the mental health patients and mental health problems. They actually come all the way from Rosebud, Hastings, the whole lot, and they're stuck here. Right, we have methadone programs that are stuck here. And a lot of our problems, like it was when I was doing security in this area, were not always the Frankston people. It was always the outsiders from every other suburb in the whole area that had come here and caused the problem. Frankston is the end of the line, right? It's the end of the train line, end of the bus lines. It's everyone, you see all these things like the Sammy Newmans that have come in here and they've put it down the Frankstonites, right, as we call Frankstonites.
Isn't it glorious? It's Frankston.
And you single-handedly
Go on,
given
what?
Frankston a terrible name, and it's a beautiful place.
It is a beautiful place.
And I know that we put down Frankston quite a bit, but I'll tell you what, Frankston's a great place to live. It's a great place, you know, the community itself, right, and the community services that we find, especially the small groups like mine. That's the thing about fishing. We work with the mental health here, we work with the disabilities, we work with the youth in trouble, autistic kids, the whole lot. And we work with a lot of people in the Pines. We actually do fishing groups with the Frankston North Community Centre every school holidays. I think last year we done 271 clinics with just over 4,000 people fishing, and 75% of that is here in Frankston. And one of the reasons to do that, because Frankston's actually set up as a tourist sort of scenario, but it's also a great place to bring people, right? We've got a great foreshore, we've got a great pier here. Even over there behind me is the Cannonock Creek, which is a safe place to bring disabilities fishing. But I'll tell you what, Frankston has changed over these years compared to what it used to be, right? Some ways are good. You know, I like the old Frankston, right? I like the old car park where the markets were and everything like that. But you know, like, Frankston's a great place to come, great place to live. Hey, there's not many places where you get views on the top of Oliver's Hill that are worth millions and millions of dollars here in Frankston, right? Or even the Pines, a house selling is in there for $600,000, where 10 years ago you could buy a house in there for 180. That's how much we've changed. That's how much Frankston's changed.
My name is Vicky Petratus, and for 11 years, back in the 80s and 90s, I lived in Seaford. I'm a true crime author, and I was writing stories about the Frankston Police right when Paul Denyer started murdering young women in Frankston. When the first victim was murdered, Elizabeth Stevens, she was murdered in Langwarrin, and I don't think the press or the police connected her murder with Debbie Freem's murder a couple of weeks later, just because the areas were different. But by the time Debbie Freem went missing and was found dead, all of a sudden there was front page headlines, you know, serial killer in Frankston.
Police are also appealing to anyone who may have information about an accident involving Debbie's silver pulsar found 2 kilometres from home late yesterday. More than 100 SES officers joined police in an intense search today for any trace of Deborah Ann Freem.
They're tearing us apart. She's got a son here that's 12 days old. We just can't handle it.
The people of Frankston were terrified, and rightly so, when you've got a serial killer on your doorstep. I interviewed one of the head police officer at Frankston, and he held an information session because people were clamouring to know what to do, how to protect themselves, and he virtually told them it's safer to walk the streets than it is to drive your own car, that you've got more chance of having an accident than you have of being caught by a serial killer. But unfortunately that message rarely sinks in when there's a serial killer operating in your area.
This area is full of young women and single mothers, people who used to feel safe here but no longer.
My husband won't let me out after dark unless I've got one of the dogs with me.
Suburbia is not a safe place to live anymore.
I have to go with my husband, I don't feel safe with a girlfriend.
Your friend's up the road, but you're too scared to go and see them.
The bad guys are winning, and that makes you angry.
I go to the nightclubs and that, and there aren't that many single girls going there now, because it's too dangerous for them to be out at night time.
Police are pouring resources into finding the murderer, who may well be a serial killer.
I remember sitting in the local fish and chip shop on Seaford Road and kind of looking sideways at the people around you going, is it you? Is it you? Because you knew that this guy was in our midst. And that, I guess, the suspicion that everybody looked at their neighbours or looked at people at shopping and just thought, could it be you? Frankston at the time had an increased police presence like you wouldn't believe. And even when Denya was killing Natalie, his car had been checked by police twice that day, and when he was killing her, the police had been called to his car because a postal worker saw him slinking down in his car and thought it was suspicious. So she was in someone's house ringing the police. By the time they got there, the car was empty. That's when he was killing Natalie. And when he came out of the bike track between the two golf courses, he looked down the road and the police were at his car. So he just walked the other way. So when her body was found close to the bike track, the two police that were checking his car said, "Hey, we were checking a car then. There was a report of a suspicious guy." And so they were knocking on his door the next day. So thankfully, even though these murders had such an impact on Frankston, the time period was only 7 weeks from go to woe, and the police, to their credit and their incredible hard work, arrested him the day after Natalie died.
Your car was parked opposite the location where the body of Natalie Russell was found. On the night that Debbie Freem disappeared, you walked over to Kennedall Railway Station, missed the train and walked back. And on the night Elizabeth Stevens disappeared, you walked in a very close proximity to Lloyd Park on your way to pick up this battery. Do you think that's fairly coincidental?
It is.
In all the circumstances?
Yeah.
It was interesting when he was caught because Natalie died, so the headlines were serial killer's third victim. I think the panic was hitting fever pitch, and all of a sudden they caught him so quickly that by Sunday morning, serial killer confesses. And so there was a sense of relief, but then something interesting happened. You have, of course, the media blackout after an event like this, but when he went to trial and pled guilty, it deprived the community of really knowing what he'd done, because the trial, the evidence that's given is scant. And then he got life, and people in Frankston, people all over Melbourne were really happy with that because everybody knew someone who was connected. When you had Natalie Russell being a victim and she was at the high school, I mean, that affects thousands of people, hundreds at the school, and then all of their families and friends and neighbours, and I think people were happy with that. And when Denya appealed and got a 30-year minimum, I attended, wasn't a rally, it was a night in Frankston where people were talking about what they could do, and some of the victims' families were there, and so Frankston then came together as a community and were really vocal in getting signatures to have his 30-year minimum quashed, just to keep him. Life means life. After something like this happens, the community always rallies, and Frankston certainly rallied to get his sentence reinstated. But unfortunately, the 30-year minimum stands, which, it's 25 years next year. So 30 years sounds a long time when it happens, but, 25 years down the track, 5 years he could be eligible for parole. And the really interesting thing was that so many people approached me and said, sometimes my dad picked up Natalie or my mum picked up Natalie from school, but that day they were running late, and even Natalie's mum, Carmel, got caught up at the Frankston shops and she was going to pick Natalie up. And I just thought, it struck me that so many people felt guilty about Natalie dying, and the only person that didn't feel guilty was Paul Denya. At the time, a lot of people tried to sell their house to get out of Frankston. They were so scared, and property prices fell. This affected real estate. It was so widespread, and I think that it would have taken years for Frankston to really recover. And I think for a long time, it was known as the place that had the serial killer. People certainly afterwards did almost murder tours. You know, they wanted to go to the locations, and I don't think it was being ghoulish. I think it was just wanting to connect with this story and the sadness of Debbie going to the milk bar in Cananook Avenue, and the bike track that kids walk down on the way home from school. And now that's renamed Nat's Track, and that's certainly a place that her family hold very dear, because she's forever connected to that bike track. And I guess over time the memories of the brutality fade and the community spirit comes back, but it will always be part of Frankston's history.
Yes, if we go back to the Kennett era, as we refer to it, at that stage, of course, all the local government areas were being changed, the boundaries were being changed, and mergers were occurring. And of course, at that time, when all that was happening, they put in commissioners to manage the council areas. One of the briefs for the commissioners was to organise finances, the funding of municipalities, and of course there was the threat that anything that wasn't rated would be seen as fair game to develop. And the natural areas, which have been a unique part of our environment, were under threat. And so we needed a mechanism to bring all those people together, and so we formed the Frankston Environmental Friends Network. And that was just 20 years ago, or 21 years ago now. We celebrated 20 years last year. It's been a unique organisation. A lot of municipalities envious having an organisation that has a good working relation with council. As it turned out, the management of the reserves stayed with the council team, and so we've still maintained that connection between the teams that work in the reserves, the council environmental officers, and the community groups, the friends groups. It's something which we've fought to protect over the years, and fortunately we've had good support throughout from the council.
I'm David Cross. I've been a local Frankston resident for about 25 years. We moved here, my wife and I, when we were newly married, about 1992. The opening of the Frankston Nature Conservation Reserve occurred in early 2016. The Committee of Management have been fantastic in making it available to the public. There is such a variation of vegetation that you walk through the reserve, plus you've got the water feature of the reservoir itself, which feeds into Sweetwater Creek. The reserve has been isolated for about 90 years, and it's slap bang in the heart of South Frankston. Unless you really live very locally to it, you would have no idea it was there. Peninsula Link was probably the last significant development that had a serious impact on the green wedges, and of course that impact is felt through the wildlife habitat corridors, that it prevents animals, native animals, moving freely from one area to another. Now they have a freeway running through, which makes it a challenge.
I've always got involved in what used to be the Australia Day Parade, we'd always hire a semi-trailer and our footballers would be on the back and blowing trumpets and going silly and throwing lollies and various gifts out as we patrolled through the streets of Frankston. We haven't had those parades for years now, but they were a great thing. All the local service groups would get involved, schools would be involved, kids would be marching, and all that sort of stuff really helped tie Frankston together. All those parades and everything used to finish up back here at Frankston Park. Our park was used for the Holden days years ago, although they're not, they had a little bit of scandal attached to them many years later. Zig and Zag used to come down here and perform. They were very popular. A lot of concerts were held here, and you'd have the ground packed with 4,000 or 5,000 people. Candles by Carolite, you'd have your 2,000 or 3,000 people with all the kids, and that Frankston Silver Band would be performing under Lloyd Warland up in the grandstand. So all those days were really great for Frankston. I'm a bit sorry now that we're going a little bit too big for our boots. I'm sure some of those things could be resurrected. It was an amazing thing to see here, the Anzac Day celebration here a couple of years back, where the ground was absolutely packed with people as the sun came up, and we had our celebration here. And I think that the thing that tickled me most, the lights all shone on my name, where I've got my name on the front of the grandstand. So as the sun came up and the lights were on and the hymns were being sung, I saw my name on the front of the grandstand on this marvellous morning when the Anzac Day celebration took place. My name had nothing to do with it, but just from a point of view of my own pride, it made me feel fantastic.
Last year and this year, there were crowds of thousands of people for both the dawn service and the morning service, including the march. And I had the great honour of being asked to plant one of the lone pine seedlings adjacent to the memorial, in conjunction with Kevin Hillier, the president of the Frankston RSL. My grandfather actually fought at Lone Pine in Gallipoli just on 100 years earlier, and so it had a certain impact on a personal level to me. And as the Citizen of the Year, it was probably one of the highlights of the activities I was invited to when I held that great honour. Coming up towards Christmas time, we have our Festival of Lights, where over a weekend, part of the road is closed off around the Civic Centre, near the Arts Centre, and they have a range of activities, music, sideshows, and the lighting up of the pine tree in the front lawn of the Civic Centre. The last few years we've gone down with our children, and it's an amazing event. It attracts many thousands of people, and it's a very family-oriented activity. One of the fantastic assets that we have in Frankston is our fabulous Arts Centre. My wife and I have been theatre subscribers to the Frankston Arts Centre for 20 odd years now, and we enjoy the range of plays and musical entertainment that's on every few weeks, and to us it's our big night out when we go to our 8 or 10 shows per year. I like to think that Frankston is a closely guarded secret. The locals, we all love it, and we're all passionate about it. And if there's a perception further afield that Frankston is not a great place to be, well, those people are missing out as far as I'm concerned.
I wouldn't live anywhere else. I'm 61, and I think I'll die here, right? And I think some people will be glad to get rid of me. But anyway, that's another story.
My opinion of Frankston, well, I love it. It's alive, and I think when people are critical about our homeless and some of our undesirables around the town, all right, it mightn't be nice to look at, but Having been stationed at some of the inner suburban towns or cities, they're so quiet it nearly makes me sick, and to come to Frankston and see a place that's alive with all sorts of people, with the beautiful beaches, the beautiful views, with our local inhabitants, I just love the place. I'd hate it to be everybody being the same type of person, the same type of personality. Here you get, and I won't get and start to talk about some of my experiences with various people, but if anybody that shops locally can't say that we're not alive, well, there's something wrong with them. They're not opening their eyes.